Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Ohio Has Issues. I'm Stephanie Haney.
I'm Mike Polk. We are your one-stop shop for Ohio politics and everything that's going on as we march our way up to this November election, one of the most important of all time.
It really is. Ohio is actually one of those situations where it really is all eyes on Ohio, and we have one of the most important, if not the most important, U.S. Senate race here in Ohio.
We're actually going to touch on that a little bit later, and the former President Trump has some thoughts on that might involve Sherrod Brown. We might even mention that later on.
Yeah, he's got his eye on some things. He's also got his eye on something pertaining to Ohio U.S. Senator J.D. Vance, which is something that we'll talk about.
That's right. But our main story today, obviously, is HB 6. Remember that thing? This was the Ohio issue that passed, how long ago now? 2018? Is that when it was?
It wasn't in 2018. It was 2019, I believe, actually. But so it's been several years, and you know we never talk about House Bill 6 on this show, so we figured we would do it for a change.
Largest bribery scandal in Ohio history, and some people have already gone down for it and whatnot. But it just keeps on producing new and different information, and we had some more drop this week, including some text messages that were involving our very own governor, Mike DeWine, and we will be discussing that as well.
Yeah, we'll be getting into that with an article by Jake Zuckerman from Cleveland.com.
Jakey Zucks knocked it out of the park with us, too. He's doing great work. And I'll be speaking with Catherine Turcer from Common Cause Ohio. She's going to actually tell us what all this means.
In terms of the timing, we will also have a brand new guest with us today. Ohio Capitol Journal's Marty Schladen joins us for the first time. He has some interesting reporting about how a key player involved in the House Bill 6 bribery scandal actually has something to do with Ohio's U.S. Senate race. So he's going to break that down for us.
Interesting. It's really good stuff. Marty does good writing as well.
And we have Megan Henry as well, friend of the show. She's with us from the Ohio Capitol Journal to give us our legislative roundup. So that's coming up here very quickly.
It is.
But the first thing that we want to do is we want to acknowledge that today's episode of Ohio Has Issues is actually on Juneteenth. It's June 19th. So if you're not familiar with what Juneteenth is, quick summary. This is truly wild, actually. This is the day when federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas in 1865. The year is key here, and they took control of the state and ensured that all of the enslaved people in that area were freed. Now, the reason the year is key here because this was 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. So it was 2.5 years after the people who had been enslaved were freed that they actually got word of it in Galveston, Texas. So that's how long it took for the final remaining people who had been enslaved to be freed. So that's why it's celebrated now as a national holiday. It became a national holiday in 2021. It was actually observed in Ohio in 2006. And I just want to say this is one of those weird holidays where I don't really feel right saying Happy Juneteenth, even though it is commemorating the last of the people who were enslaved being freed. It's not
definitely a good thing.
It's a good thing that happened, but it's tricky wording. So it is Juneteenth, and it is something we honor today.
It is very cool, and it's very surprising that Ohio did it before they were forced to do it federally. And I'm actually proud of us for that. What year was that?
2006.
2006, Ohio. That's really unlike you. I thought we'd still be kicking and screaming, but I'm proud of you guys. Nice work.
Definitely not the first to observe it, but among the earlier of states to
earlier
observe
than I would think.
Yeah.
All right, what were we starting off with today?
All right, let's get to our Ohio roundup. There's been some things happening in the General Assembly. Megan Henry with the Ohio Capitol Journal really has the boots on the ground there. So let's hear from her about what's been happening there. All right, happy to have Megan Henry back with us again from Ohio Capitol Journal. Thanks for being with us again on Ohio Has Issues, Megan.
Thanks for having me.
You are here with our legislative roundup today. So we know you've been following what's going on in the Ohio General Assembly, particularly this week in the House. So I want to ask you first about a bill that has to do with discrimination. What's going on there?
Yes, the Ohio House passed several bills last week during their session, and one of them was about discrimination when it comes to natural hair in schools. And so this bill, as it's written currently, would prohibit discrimination against natural hair in K-12 schools. Now, this bill, when it was originally introduced, was much more broad and provided, and protected against discrimination in housing and jobs. And then an amendment in committee stripped that and limited it to schools, but it passed overwhelmingly in the House.
Okay, so then that moves on to the Senate, correct?
Yes, it's awaiting Senate committee.
Okay, cool. All right, next up, there was another bill related to pregnancy. What's happening there?
Yes, House Bill 7. This is a bipartisan bill, and it has to do with a lot of different things. Some of it has to do with infant mortality, and Ohio ranks low in that. They rank 44th in the nation for infant mortality, and so the bill has provisions to support doula services, pregnancy, and also postpartum as well, and just help mom and baby and families in the first 1,000 days of life. So helping the pregnancy and also after birth to help with that support.
And bipartisan, you mentioned there, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And then the final one you have to let us know about today. This is an interesting one. What is this last one?
This is an interesting one. Yes, it has to do with feral pigs, which I will admit I did not know much about until last week during the House session. But feral pigs have been a real issue in some counties in southeastern Ohio, and they can cause lots of damage to the pork economy, essentially, and cost taxpayers billions of dollars if this does not get under control. And so this bill that was introduced back in April, I believe, would allow people to shoot feral pigs on someone else's property without a license as long as you report it to the state. So basically, it's allows for open season for feral pigs.
I did not know this was a concern. I also did not know it was costing all this money and that we had all these feral pigs running around in Ohio.
I did not either, but it's been a real problem in Texas. And so the lawmakers were saying that they don't want that to happen here in Ohio. So trying to be proactive and get on top of it before it gets worse.
I see. And what's next for those last two bills that we just talked about there as well, the pregnancy bill and the feral pig related bill?
Yes, so they both move over to the Senate as well, and they are in committee now. So we'll start hearing those. Well, we're about to go on summer break actually for the General Assembly, so we might have to wait until the fall to hear more about those bills.
All right. Well, Megan, thank you very much, as always, for keeping us up to date on what's happening in Ohio. We appreciate you being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Megan Henry really bringing us a variety of information coming out of the General Assembly.
The worst part about the feral pigs that are overtaking our state, from what I understand, is that they're not even very tasty.
Oh, no.
I hear that they're gamey. I hear that they're not even good to eat. So it's like they just are ruining stuff for no good reason, just digging up all of our gardens.
They could have been good bacon, and they're not, apparently.
Yep, not very good bacon, kind of lean.
I feel bad for those little piggies.
Thank you, Megan.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. We'll have links to those stories by Megan in the show notes and in the YouTube information, so check that out.
All right, well, one of the main reasons we've been commissioned to put this entire show on is because we have one of the most important elections in the country in November here in Ohio. It could decide the balance of the Senate. We've got your old boy Sherrod Brown, who's been in that office for a minute now, up against Bernie Moreno. But there is another Ohio senator on the scene right now that you guys might be familiar with. His name's J.D. Vance. And I'll tell you what, President Trump is a fan. He's in talks right now to possibly be the VP pick for President Trump.
Interesting.
Yes, this is actually not just me saying this. There's all kinds of articles saying this. I think we have one here from the Atlantic, yeah. So, and it seems as though he's actively seeking this out, just to be clear.
Which is interesting because there was a time when J.D. Vance was not a Trump fan.
That is true. That's very true. But he found him in his heart for whatever reason. So he is now one of a few candidates. He's actually one of few people that he is being vetted for the possible VP position, along with North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, U.S. Senator Tim Scott, Marco Rubio of Florida, and then our boy J.D. So he's in the big four right there. And this I guess probably could be meaningful. A straw poll conducted Sunday during the People's Convention, which is an event hosted by the conservative nonprofit Turning Point Action, showed Mr. Vance was the fan favorite to be Mr. Trump's running mate, earning 43% of the votes. It should be noted that he was also the only one of those four people mentioned who actually spoke at the Turning Points thing.
Okay.
So that might have been like a, oh, we're happy he came kind of thing, but it might be sincere.
Sure.
So now, if here's the question. First of all, would he be a good choice? And there's a million different opinions on that.
Sure.
But some of the stuff he has going for him is he has that blue collar Rust Belt kind of mentality. He wrote the book Hillbilly Elegy, which was a big hit and launched him into fame. He's only 39 years old. He is adamantly supportive of Donald Trump now, despite the fact, as you said earlier, he was not such a fan. In fact, back as recently as 2016, he referred to Donald Trump as, quote, cultural heroine.
Oh.
Yes, and here's another quote. At one point he said, I go back and forth between thinking Trump is a cynical asshole like Nixon, who wouldn't be that bad and might even prove useful, or that he's America's Hitler.
Ooh.
So he's made quite a jump, as you can see.
Yeah.
And now he is legitimately in the running to possibly be the next vice president of the United States. Now, what would that mean for Ohio? That's what we're here to talk about.
Right, that's an interesting question.
Because if he were to be selected, then what happens to his seat? Well, first of all, you can run as a senator and still maintain your Senate seat, and he wouldn't have to give it up unless he actually won. So if he were to be his VP choice and run, then and lose, then he could just keep being a senator. But if he won, then he would have to step down, and then he would be replaced temporarily by Governor Mike DeWine. Pretty safe bet to say he would put in somebody similarly minded. And then there would be a special election months later to try and determine who the next senator would be. But J.D. Vance, really, this is an Ohio senator. Ohio, once again, front and center in the 2024 election, because you really might have the vice presidential candidate. And I could see that possibly happening. He really likes him.
I will know soon enough who that candidate will be.
That's true.
It's only a matter of time.
Now, we also have another update in the race for you, and that's because the former president himself, Donald Trump, has mentioned who he wants to go after the most in this upcoming election. I think we have the article right here. This is from Fox News, just right here. Fox News Digital, of all places. And here's what Fox News Digital had to say. They said that Ohio is one of the 2 states that Donald Trump is targeting for the Senate race in 2024. Senator Lindsey Graham asked Trump to share with lawmakers the importance of taking back the Senate in 2024. And according to a person in the room, Graham mentioned that there were several vulnerable Democrats in the Senate with records very similar to President Biden's. Trump said that Senator Sherrod Brown and Jon Tester of Montana are the top of the list of Democrats he is seeking to oust in 2024. 2 vulnerable Democrats. Those guys are in red states, won significantly by Trump in 2020. He said, and this is a quote from that source, "They opposed everything I did while I was president, and now they are talking like Republicans." And that's somewhat true, actually. They've actually pushed both of those candidates, recognize that they're in red states running for Senate seats in a race that could decide the balance of the Senate. And both of them have tacked a little bit more to the right at this point and embraced some of the Trump policies from his time in office and are definitely not embracing Joe Biden in the way that some of the other candidates in safer blue states are.
We did definitely see something recently in a Sherrod Brown campaign ad that referred to some of the ways in which he had gone along with Trump during Trump's time in office.
Yes. So, Ohio, you're the center of the world again. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, so that's the start of our Senate update. So the second half of our Senate race update for this week involves Bernie Moreno, of course. And so I want to give you a little bit of backstory before we get into kind of the meat and potatoes of this particular story. So you might recall during the debates for Ohio's Republican Senate ticket, those were between Bernie Moreno and current state Senator Matt Dowling and current Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose. Moreno had said that he was against House Bill 6.
I remember that.
Okay, and that his then opponents, LaRose and Dowling, would have to answer for House Bill 6 becoming law. So let's back it up and remind everybody what happened with House Bill 6.
Please.
This scandal. FirstEnergy admitted to bribing Larry Householder, who was then the Speaker of the Ohio House of Representatives, with $60 million to get House Bill 6 passed.
Yes.
Now, why would they do that? What did House Bill 6 do? Well, House Bill 6 gave a FirstEnergy subsidiary a $1 billion bailout to support 2 failing nuclear power plants.
And we are still paying for them.
Yeah, there are still portions of that are on the books, and we are still paying in certain ways related to House Bill 6.
Yes.
Now, Larry Householder right now is in federal prison for 20 years.
Yes, he's in prison. Our former Speaker is in prison.
He's also indicted on 22 state felony charges.
Dave Yost going after him.
To all of this. Okay, so FirstEnergy also admitted to bribing the former chair of the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, Sam Randazzo, with $4.3 million to get some preferential regulatory treatment from PUCO.
Sam Randazzo cannot comment because he died by suicide.
Yeah, after he was charged by federal and state authorities, he then died by suicide. Now, we have learned from documents that a Cleveland business owner by the name of Tony George had made connections between FirstEnergy executives, Chuck Jones and Mike Dowling, and the people involved in the bribery scandal. We also know now that Tony George donated $2,500 to the Bernie Moreno campaign recently. And this is where our friend Ohio Capitol Journal reporter Marty Schladen comes in. So he joins us now on the show for the first time. I want to give you a little background about Marty Schladen. He worked in Indiana and Texas before coming back here. He's an Ohio guy, returned to his native Ohio for the Columbus Dispatch in 2017. So he's been back on the scene for a while. He has won state and national journalism awards when it comes to investigating utility regulation. Hello, exactly what we're talking about here. And also public corruption, among other things. And he wrote all about Tony George and his involvement and role when it comes to House Bill 6 and connection. So he breaks it down for us now. All right, we're here with Marty now from Ohio Capitol Journal. Marty, thank you for being with us here on Ohio Has Issues.
Thanks for having me, Stephanie.
Taking a look at your recent reporting, your recent article in Ohio Capitol Journal, it was kind of talking about some things that are happening kind of tangentially related to the FirstEnergy House Bill 6 scandal, which is something we're kind of focusing on this week on the show. So I wanted to ask you to kind of really take it a step back to break it down for people who may not be so familiar. Your reporting involves Tony George. Who is Tony George?
Tony George is a Cleveland businessman who I never heard of until I covered the Larry Householder trial in Cincinnati last year. But he's apparently very wired in. He was quite close to Chuck Jones, former CEO of FirstEnergy, who's now under indictment. And he was also quite close to Larry Householder, who is now former Speaker of the House, who's now spending 20 years in federal prison.
And in terms of his relation to the FirstEnergy House Bill 6 scandal, we understand that he's referred to in the documents, but not by name. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, that's a typical thing in federal indictments. They don't name people, but very often it's just totally obvious who they're talking about. In the case of George, it became obvious once the case finally went to trial. So he's referred to as Individual B. And it's pretty striking how he was involved in the process of introducing people, getting Householder on board with this plan to pass a bailout for FirstEnergy, and he was there right up into early 2020 in the middle of things. And then we all know that in the middle of 2020, the whole thing blew up and Householder and several others were arrested.
So to kind of bring this into the political realm, there was one scenario that was described that involved the former president, Donald Trump. Can you tell us about that with Tony George?
Yeah, this was at the very beginning of the honeymoon. During his trial, Householder sort of disastrously took the stand on his own behalf, and he said a lot of things that were just transparently false, and he got pilloried on cross about it. But one of the things that sounded, really sketchy to me was he claimed that it was raining during the World Series in 2016, and he just happened to go into the FirstEnergy executive box. But what the federal prosecutors produced were documents showing that Chuck Jones, the FirstEnergy CEO, 3 days after the World Series is over, is texting Tony George saying, "I've got stuff I want to talk to Larry about. We need action in early 2017. I need his contact information." So it made it sound like, George and Householder were friends, and he was, brokering this relationship with Jones. So then Householder gets reelected to the Ohio House after serving in the 2000s. Donald Trump wins his race, and everybody's headed to the inaugural in Washington. So then Tony George invites Larry Householder to fly on the FirstEnergy jet with George, Householder's son, and Michael Dowling, who at that time was the number 2 at FirstEnergy. And then they go to DC. George had booked Householder and Chuck Jones into the same swanky hotel. They had this round of swanky dinners at steakhouses. And according to testimony that was put on at the trial, that's where the outlines of House Bill 6 first began to emerge.
Okay, so thank you for breaking that down and kind of the connections that have been drawn between Tony George and conversations that would eventually lead to the agreement that led to the bribery scheme that, as you mentioned, has householder in federal prison right now. So bring this to present day. There were some comments made about the House Bill 6 scandal on the campaign trail for the Senate race here in Ohio. Can you tell me about some of those comments that were made by the candidates before the primary election here in Ohio?
Yeah, there was a debate, I believe in February, and Frank LaRose started to go after Bernie Moreno over Moreno's earlier support for wind and solar energy, which I suppose is controversial in Frank LaRose's mind. So Moreno swung back by saying, you were involved with House Bill 6 and you haven't answered questions. Matt Dolan was involved, then Senator Matt Dolan was involved in House Bill 6. He still hasn't answered questions, and you all need to answer questions. I wasn't ever for House Bill 6.
Now, why is this all relevant right now? What's happening right now in the current race for Ohio Senate seat?
Well, so now, and I guess it was about a month ago, maybe a little bit more, there was a fundraiser being held, which is, the mother's milk of politics.
And that fundraiser was hosted for candidate Bernie Moreno, correct?
Yes, I'm sorry. That's kind of a crucial point. Yes, but who should be a co-host of this fundraiser but Tony George, who wasn't just somebody who was sort of, elliptically involved in the House Bill 6 matter. He was in the center of some of these relationships through the whole thing. When I approached his communications director, Moreno's communications director, with this, they wouldn't comment on the record. Instead, they just went after Sherrod Brown. They wouldn't say, yes, we knew that Tony George was involved with House Bill 6. No, we didn't. They wouldn't answer whether, knowing now that Tony George was involved with House Bill 6, that Bernie would give back the $2,500 that he received from Tony George or donated to charity. They just attacked Sherrod Brown.
And how has Sherrod Brown's campaign treated donations in this realm?
When all of the stuff hit the fan in the summer of 2021 in July, I forget the exact date that arrests were made, but within 10 days, the Brown campaign donated the $21,000 he had gotten from FirstEnergy over the years to food banks around Ohio.
Okay. All right, Marty, I think that clears it all up for us. Thank you very much for breaking that down. A lot of detail in that article. I would really recommend people to check that out on Ohio Capitol Journal. Marty, where's the best place for people to find you in order to find your work?
I'm on Twitter, or we're at www.ohiocapitoljournal.com.
Okay, and what's your Twitter handle for the people listening?
Oh, at Marty Schladen, and I suppose it's called X now.
That's true. I'm still saying tweets. Thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate it.
Sure.
All right, that was Marty Schladen kind of breaking down those relationships for us. I really recommend that you go to that article, which will be linked again in the YouTube information and the show notes, because a lot of detail there to kind of peel through.
Good job to Marty on his first time. You nailed it.
Yeah, we'll be happy to have you back
Marty
as soon
fans.
as you would come, Marty. Big fans.
Or what's next?
All right, so we're going to talk more about House Bill 6 now and the FirstEnergy bribery scandal. This is sort of like the main topic of the day, if you will, because there's some text between our current governor, Mike DeWine, back from when he was running for the governor's office, that there is some new reporting about.
That's true. This actually happened way back in, was it 2018 or so?
These texts are from 2018.
From 2018. And these records show that FirstEnergy has already spent millions backing DeWine. And 2 days before these texts, its subsidiary gave $500,000 to a pro-DeWine Republican Governors Association. This is based on reporting from our boy Jake Zuckerman at Cleveland.com. This is revealed in these texts. This is about a month before the 2018 election. And again, these are just coming out now because of the HB6 trial, and we are still parsing through all of the documents.
Yeah, a lot of documents to share.
I mean, we're not other people are, and then we're talking to you about it.
Right, like Jake Zuckerman, who, by the way, we had wanted to chat with him, but he's out of town, so thank you for responding to our emails even when you're on a trip, Jake. We hope you're having a really good time on your vacay.
You deserve it.
And we miss you terribly, but we're going to do our best to try and talk through your work because it's so important. So let's take a look at some of these text messages. So this text message exchange is from October 13th, 2018, and this is from then-candidate DeWine to then-FirstEnergy CEO Chuck Jones. And you can see here that he says to Chuck Jones, "Can you call me?" And then also mentions that a teachers union gave $1 million the day before to a group backing his Democratic rival. And then you can see here in the text messages, they do set a time to have a conversation.
That's right. Now, again, I think we should say this now and repeatedly, that the governor has not done anything criminally wrong as far as we've seen so far.
Right, there's
we need
no
to make
evidence
that clear.
that he's done anything criminally wrong.
And whenever you ask even a mild question about this, his offices make sure to let you know that and to tell you that even the implication that he might have any idea of what's going on could lead to some serious libel cases. So we are very careful to make sure that we let you know there is no proof that the governor has done anything wrong, but we do have these text messages which do at least suggest some more involvement than people were aware of before.
Yeah, suggest a certain level of knowledge that the governor had seemed to say that he did not have before. And we will get to a statement from his office in a little bit, but first we want to get through these text messages.
That's right. Now, here's the next one. DeWine, this is the second one. Jones told Mike Dowling, that's then FirstEnergy Senior Vice President, about DeWine asking for the call. By October 16, 2018, the FirstEnergy men agreed to a quote, dark money contribution to support DeWine. And
the thing about dark money is you don't have to disclose all the details about dark money, and they can be unlimited in size. So we want to point that out.
Hence the dark.
Yeah, very dark. Okay, so let's get to some more text messages now. This is another set of text exchange. So DeWine, as I had mentioned, said that he didn't know the extent of FirstEnergy's dark money support for his campaign, but as we see here and as Zuckerman reports, these text messages and other documents suggest that he personally solicited that money from FirstEnergy's top executives, which coordination is not allowed. I know we'll talk more about that later. Now, this text here shows FirstEnergy's top executives wondering if they had already done enough. That big paragraph there basically says, you know, we've already done enough, more than anybody else, for DeWine in his support of the governorship.
Right. Dowling, go after the nursing homes already.
Dowling is shown here texting Chuck Jones that DeWine, quote, already knows about the $500,000 contribution that FirstEnergy's subsidiary provided to RGA, the Republican Governors Association, that week, which is an organization that did, in fact, support DeWine's campaign.
True.
Okay, so there are also new links that we want to let you know about between FirstEnergy and Lieutenant Governor Jon Husted, who was also involved in this. So back in 2017, FirstEnergy backed Husted, who at the time was going against DeWine for the Republican nomination for governor. He bowed out to join the ticket, but did keep an open line of communication with Dowling. The text messages that you're looking at right now give us some insight into that.
The company that year secretly gave $1 million to another dark money group for what's described in company records as the, quote, Husted campaign. Around that time, Dowling texted Husted about a supportive mailer and TV ad he saw. Quote, thank you for helping us make it possible, Husted replied.
That was Huston's reply to the text message.
Yes.
Thank you for helping to make it possible. Now, when Husted agreed to drop his candidacy and then join DeWine's ticket to eventually become lieutenant governor because they were successful, Dowling told Husted that he was proud of him.
Aww.
And Husted responded and said, I hope I didn't disappoint you.
Aww. You don't want to disappoint your dark money pals. I've always said.
Even referring to, you know, their friendship at a point in these text messages as well.
Now, here is a statement from Governor Mike DeWine's office. This is from Dan Tierney. We did not see much new news in the report you referenced. The 501c4 contributions from FirstEnergy were previously reported on, as was the fact that FirstEnergy separately donated to the DeWine Husted campaign. The governor has repeatedly stated that he and his campaigns follow all relevant laws, and the text messages you reference are consistent with that.
So that was directly in response to an email that I sent to Dan Tierney saying, do you want to comment on this? Do you want to comment on the fact that there's references here to knowledge of this $500,000 donation, okay? Now, we also reached out to Lieutenant Governor Husted's office, didn't get a reply from Husted's team, but you know who did get a reply?
Who's that?
Jake Zuckerman,
Oh.
in his reporting. So we're going to share the response that was in there. This came from spokesperson Haley Carducci. She said that Husted doesn't remember what he was referring to as far as Dowling, quote, helping make it possible, when that text exchange that we just showed you referred to a favorable TV ad for him. And that Carducci also said most of the texts are other parties discussing Husted and not Husted speaking himself, and also pointed out that Husted has publicly said that he supports the plants because they provide the vast majority of Ohio's carbon-free energy. So that's the statement that Zuckerman got from Husted's team.
A lot of implications here, a lot of cross lines, and a lot of things that could mean things that don't necessarily mean anything yet. And we need somebody to help us unravel a little bit. And who better to do that than Catherine Turcer? She's the executive director of Common Cause Ohio, and she helped us work through the timeline of how this went down. Take a look. Catherine, thank you for your time. Appreciate you.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
In case anybody doesn't know, would you just tell everyone what Common Cause does real briefly?
So Common Cause essentially focuses on the rules of government. What are the things that invite people in? What are obstacles to elections? What are the obstacles to government functioning? We focus on government accountability. Sometimes we're called a watchdog.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, you've been watching something for quite some time now, and that's, of course, the HB6 scandal, one of the largest, considered to be the largest bribery scandal in Ohio history. And this thing keeps having new layers to this onion, including some text messages that dropped last week. Why don't you tell us about what those text messages said and why we're just getting them now?
So one of the things that I think is really challenging is how long, as you described it, the peeling of the onion has taken, because the text messages are public records from 2018. And, this was the year that Governor DeWine was up for election. He was running against Rich Cordray, and the text messages were during the heat of that election and essentially asking, the CEO of FirstEnergy, can we talk? Do you have time to talk? And, essentially it was a fundraising ask. And you have to connect the dots to truly put together what likely happened. But FirstEnergy was giving in a really significant way millions of dollars, and whether it went to the Republican Governors Association or other kind of dark money entities, they were giving in a really significant way. And one of the text messages that we can now see focused on, this one was basically between Chuck Jones, so FirstEnergy CEO, and Mike Dowling, who is a vice president of FirstEnergy. And, it basically saying, hey, you can call the governor back and tell him that we have $500,000 that's going to the Republican Governors Association's dark money group. And the dark money group is called State Solutions. Now, I'm clearly paraphrasing. And one of the things that I would encourage people to do, these are public records, and, check out the article that is in the Cleveland Plain Dealer. Jake Zuckerman looked at these public records, but they're from the Ohio Consumer Council and they're from the Public Utilities Commission.
Mm-hmm.
And, what's sad is it just took so long.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Why now? Why just now? And is it because there's just such a wealth of information and not enough people to comb through it? And is it Jake finding these things on his own?
No, the way to think about this is when the investigation against Larry Householder started, everything was a public record. And so in 2019, folks could have gotten those public records, but they might not have thought to get them. Because, public records are great, but you actually have to ask for them. You have to have some inkling. You have to make sure that your request is small enough that the entity will honor it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when, reporters are like, oh, we definitely need these records, the DOJ said, hey, we're in the middle of an investigation against Larry Householder and Matt Borges. No one can have these records.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened. So they are now truly public, after 2 elections for governor.
Right.
And I think what's really sad is the state legislature has not made any changes to actually create greater transparency so that we could follow the money during the election.
Now, we need to be clear, there's nothing in these latest revelations that's directly say that the governor has done anything illegal. It's more about just the visual of him coordinating more directly with FirstEnergy than we've seen before. Is that the revelation?
So there are laws against coordinating. Now, the way to think about this is there are campaign contribution limits. So, and we have these limits so that, people who are elected officials aren't corrupted, right? So that there's not, they call it quid pro quo. So they say, okay, we don't want to have that happen. And so what they do, what we have in place are contribution limits to candidates. When a candidate starts coordinating with the dark money entities in really direct ways, because there's a lot of indirect stuff you could do that is legal, but in very direct ways, coordination is prohibited by both federal and state law. Now, I think what's important here is, we're still connecting the dots, but what we do know is that when Dan Tierney, who is the governor's press secretary, talked about this, he said, oh, this is just business as usual. Well, okay. Business as usual is really problematic in this situation. If you consider this kind of coordination and organizing with dark money entities to be business as usual, it is a problem. And so we do need more robust anti-coordination rules, and we do need to be able to follow the money to actually have greater transparency in our elections. We're just going to keep being ripped off and have scandals similar to the House Bill 6 scandal.
Now, the governor has been asked about these latest text messages, and what has his response been?
He essentially says he doesn't quite remember, which now so one of the things I have to say is, we're talking right before election 2018. My guess is he was talking to lots and lots of people. It is possible he does not remember this specific text, but in the whole, he should understand what he did. And I do think this is an opportunity for the governor to really lead the charge to create greater transparency, to stop this, being business as usual and not setting us up for the next kind of House Bill 6 householder scandal.
More than anything, this seems like it acts as a window, not into like some direct tie to some kind of corruption or anything like that, but more of a window into just how kind of cruddy and gross our campaign finance system is right now, where we have politicians, whether you're going around the bend or not, you are still saying, hey, I could use a little bit of money. The teachers union's kind of busting us up over here. I could use a little extra scratch. And getting to actually see behind the scenes in a way that we don't normally. Do you think this is pretty much how it works all the time for everybody?
So I am sure when it comes to fundraising, and you could imagine, like, if you're a candidate, you're going to be looking to see, what your opposition is doing and what their fundraising is like. And you're going to be paying attention to that and doing the best you can to raise money. And we should say, there is a need for money in elections. Whether it's television advertisements, whether it's billboards, whether it's mailers, social media ads even cost money. So candidates need their ad to get their message out about who they are, what they believe in, to encourage people to vote. So money is necessary in elections, and yet the system that we have created without a lot of transparency does set up folks to take advantage of it. And so what we really need to do is make sure that we create a greater disclosure of all activities. So not just, what candidates are receiving directly, but also all the money circling around them. And we should be thinking about this as a systemic problem and not just a problem that is a householder problem. So, I think that's been part of the problem is this, oh my gosh, this householder guy, he must have been really terrible, as opposed to thinking about, okay, Larry Householder was operating in a system that is really problematic.
Right. Yeah. And he was able to manipulate it despite, from everything I've read in every interview, being not a very smart man, frankly. From what I've seen, I just can't believe that he pulled the wool over our eyes as Ohioans. And what are you going to do, though, I guess? I do.
Well, what are you going to do? You can shine a light on dark money.
Yes, and that's
so
what
that
you're
we
trying to
can
do,
stop
and we
this.
appreciate it. Speaking of, is there anything else that could come out of this right now that you could see, a smoking gun or something? We're still going through these documents from 2018, and we're still finding things monthly. What could possibly be found in those documents eventually that could be more conclusive in determining who is to blame here?
So I think it's very unlikely that we are going to find, a candidate, whether it's Governor DeWine or Lieutenant Governor Husted, or it's very unlikely we're going to hear if you give this dark money, if you give
Right.
to this dark money entity, I will support, I don't know, Sam
Mhm.
Randazzo. I think,
I'll give you a quid pro quo.
yeah, I mean,
Right.
nobody's going to put that in writing. And I think that's one of the challenges. When we look at a public record, we all bring our own experience. We bring the experience of the householder trial. And it may be that we are too cynical, but there is a reason that we are cynical. And it's because of what happened in the scandal and how the Public Utilities Commission process for appointments is still not as transparent. It's not like the legislature has taken steps to ensure that we're on the right path.
When you actually have to go through these records that Jake and other people are going through right now and combing through these things, what's like the thing that pops out where you say, oh, that is of note, and I actually need to bring this to people's attention? Something back there. Why was it with that he said this is something important right here?
So I think that the can we talk? One, how close it was to the election, how much money we already knew had come from FirstEnergy to support his election. And then also, the whole throwing out, hey, the Ohio Education Association gave $1 million, it's very clear it's about fundraising. And then the second one, which I think that this is something that all of the public and reporters should be paying attention to, is whenever a dark money group is mentioned, we should be alert to that and thinking about, well, how does that actually connect? And how does it connect to what we learned during the householder trial? And that takes a lot of time and energy. And I think that's the other thing that's important is, going back to your onion and how, it's slowly, I think, slowly peeling it and how annoying it is, how long everything takes. I think it's also important because, we know dark money groups exist, but in 2018 and 2019, we had a few different names, but not much more. And it wasn't until after 2020, we were putting things together. So remember, July of 2020 was when Householder and Borges were arrested.
Right.
And even then, FirstEnergy in that indictment was called, Company A. So it's been this really long process.
Well, it does feel like we are coming to some sort of a gross conclusion and a grisly conclusion. And I appreciate your help in helping us sort through it and tell us what the heck's going on.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to encourage folks to really push for greater transparency, because the only way out of this mess is for us to be able to see it and to make the necessary changes.
Amen, Catherine. Thank you so much, Catherine. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
So what's the overall lesson from this entire situation and that discussion that we had right there? It's not necessarily that anything illegal happened, technically illegal happened. It's just that we've grown comfortable into the system where this stuff happens that isn't necessarily illegal, but is obviously quite shady and flawed. And we just kind of accept that now.
Not great.
Not great, not great. So, yeah, thank you for the help, Kath. Appreciate you telling us what's going on in the world. And thank you so much for watching Ohio Has Issues.
Yeah, we appreciate you being with us, and we will see you back here next week. Have a good week, everybody.
Bye, folks.